Okay, folks. Well, this is Linda Smith, and I am with the Bipartisan Policy Center, as many of you know. And what we're going to do today is talk to you about a recent survey that we conducted of parents who use childcare in this country. And our goal was to try to figure out what's going on with parents and their views on childcare and their views on utilization of childcare. So today I'm going to be joined with two of my colleagues from the Bipartisan Policy Center, Arabella Pluta-Ehlers and Kathleen McHenry. They'll go through some of the pieces and then I will wrap it up. What we want to do is report to you what we've learned on this survey and then talk a little bit about where are we going with information like this. So what are the implications for this for childcare in the future, and what does this mean, and how can we start now to plan for a complete recovery as our nation goes back to work. So with that said, before we get started and we have any other questions, I just want to let everyone know that yes, the slides will be posted. The survey is posted on our website, and also the copy or a live recording of this webinar will be put up on our website when all this is over. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Arabella, who's going to talk to you a little bit about the survey, describe it, and then she will be followed by Kathleen McHenry, who will talk you through the pieces of the survey that talk about the impact on parents and work. And then I will take it up from there and talk to you about the implications for childcare and what we learned there. So I'm going to turn it over to Arabella now. Thank you.
Hi all, I'm Arabella Pluta-Ehlers. I'm a project coordinator with BPC. And I just have one more logistic note to add to what Linda said. If you have questions for us during the presentation or at the end when we'll have time for discussion, you can submit them. You should see a little Q&A box on your screen. So submit them there and we'll be able to review them. So just some background on the survey and the work we've done around this issue. We did a survey with Morning Consult in October with kind of two main goals. So one, we wanted to understand better what choices parents were making around childcare financially, how finding, keeping, and paying for childcare impacts parents' financial decisions and future planning. And then we also wanted to better understand kind of a lot of the work we were doing. We were realizing we had questions about like what choices parents were making, why they were making them, what they would really prefer or seek out in childcare that we just didn't have good answers to. So we have some kind of top line findings here. We found that probably not surprisingly, parents reported that it was difficult to find quality childcare within their budget, and they make significant changes to their budgets and lifestyle to afford childcare. So that included reducing spending on non-essential things like vacations, but also essential things like groceries. And relying on family and friends to reduce their need for care. And we also found that childcare impacts a parent's ability to participate in the workforce. Parents reported that they needed childcare to find a job, keep a job, work more hours. And then kind of back on this issue of what parents would choose, we asked some questions about both like logistics, like where parents would like care, how they get to their care arrangements, but then also some more open-ended questions about what parents look for. And we saw kind of these recurring themes of they want an environment that's safe, they want to trust their provider, trust the place that they're sending their child, they're looking for quality and a caring staff and environment. So then back to kind of these financial points, obviously the world and the economy looks very different now than it did in October. So we wanted to better understand the impact of COVID-19 on working parents and providers, like keeping in mind that when we did this initial survey, it was a very steady economy, there was low unemployment, and parents were still having trouble affording and finding care. So we wanted to better understand kind of childcare needs during the pandemic and what this might mean for the childcare industry moving forward. Sorry about that. And then just some notes on methodology, and you can find this all on our website. We conducted this most recent survey at the end of March into early April. And at this point, most states already had a stay-at-home order in place. And like our previous survey, we sampled parents with children under 5 who were paying for childcare And we were looking at, in this survey, parents who paid for childcare anytime in the last 3 months to kind of get at families who might have had their situations change as a result of COVID. And we also pulled out some data about essential workers to better understand what their needs and access look like during this time. We also asked parents about the arrangements they were using before COVID, and they were able to choose multiple options. So we know that a lot of parents combine types of care. So this is just kind of a sample of the different answers we got. And this kind of allowed us to draw some conclusions about how COVID is impacting different types of care, particularly different centers and different size centers versus family childcare homes. So just kind of some top lines, and Catherine will get into these more in the next few slides. But some things that have changed in the responses, we saw that the majority of parents have experienced a change in their work situation as a result of COVID. So only 14% had not experienced a change. So that might be like switching from working in person to working remote, or experiencing layoffs, working fewer hours. We also found changes in childcare availability and use. So we are also trying to understand what's happening with providers right now and kind of using parents as a proxy to get some data around that. And we found that 60% of providers were not operating as usual. So providers were closing, were limiting spaces or limiting hours, and parents were reporting that they changed how they're using childcare. We also saw an increase in parents reporting it as very difficult to find childcare within their budget. That number almost doubled since our October survey. But then some things haven't changed. We see that even with all of these differences in the work environment, parents still need childcare, especially those who are working in person and those who are essential workers. But even those who are working remote report needing support or relief as they're working. We also found that 42% of parents are still paying for childcare, either the full or partial amount, even though many of them are not using it. And we also saw in our kind of open-ended questions these same themes about the importance of safety and trust in childcare arrangements. So we asked about what would make you comfortable sending your child back to care, what would the impact be if your childcare provider closed, and we saw a lot of these kind of just like wanting communication and trust and feeling safe about where their child is. So I'm going to pass it over to Kathleen McHenry, who's going to kind of get into depth about some of these data points.
Kathleen, sorry, you're muted. 1 second, sorry. Can you unmute yourself? Yeah. Try that again, if you can unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Sorry about that. So I'm going to talk a little bit first about the impact we found the coronavirus has had on parents' work. So the parents that we surveyed had all been working within the last 3 months. We wanted to make sure that we looked at parents who were paying for childcare because of work in the last 3 months. But we also asked what the change has been in their work schedules due to the coronavirus. And that allowed us to look at, how their lives have been altered. So just over half of households have somebody who's working from home or working remotely due to the coronavirus. And we found that just around 15% of households have not yet experienced a change in their work environments. So you can see that pretty much, nearly every household has had some sort of impact on their work due to the coronavirus. And on the next slide, you'll see some, we saw some differences in demographics in terms of changing work environments. Some were more likely to be working from home than others, specifically men. Those with higher incomes and those with more education were more likely to be working remotely or at home. We also found that those with lower incomes were much more likely to have been laid off or furloughed recently compared to those with higher incomes. If you go to the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about the childcare needs during the coronavirus. We know that work is kind of childcare is necessary for work, so we wanted to ask about with changing work environments what the need for childcare was. And of parents that we surveyed, just 7% said that they are still using their previous childcare arrangement, which is a very startling number. I will say that this doesn't mean that percentage of childcare programs are closed. Later on, we'll show a statistic that parents said about 20% of their providers, or about 20% of parents said that their providers were still open. So that's kind of, you'll see that some parents are reporting that their providers are open, but not all of those parents are still using their care arrangements. And that means that parents are using a variety of methods to care for their children right now, including about half are keeping them home with themselves, a family member or friend right now. So around half don't necessarily need formal childcare. Of parents that do need childcare, you're seeing about 18% of them need relief while working from home, and about 19%, about the same amount, still need childcare during their regular 9-to-5 work schedule. And so as Arabella mentioned, we kind of wanted to look at the differences between essential workers and those who are currently working from home, because we know right now those essential workers are keeping our economy open and keeping the rest of us safe and healthy. So no surprise here, but essential workers have a greater need for childcare right now. The need for childcare for essential workers during the workday is nearly double that of those who are working remotely. And if you go to the next slide, we also asked, for parents who are still looking for childcare right now, how difficult has it been for them to find that childcare? And you'll see that graph kind of sloping up, showing that it's much more difficult for parents to find childcare than it is for parents to say that it has been easy to find childcare. We also found that for those with lower incomes, it was much more likely for them to say it was very difficult, so that darker red number, than those with higher incomes. With lower incomes, it was 22% reporting it was very difficult, and with higher incomes, it was just 14%. So if you go, and then Arabella mentioned the previous survey that we had done back in October, and we asked a similar question of parents then. So we wanted to compare how, what the change has been over the last 6 months. And we found that it's much more difficult for parents to find childcare now than it was just 6 months ago. Of parents reporting that it was very difficult, right now it's 33%, and back in October it was 18%. So it's nearly doubled. And then we also saw some differences across communities in the ability for parents to find childcare. So, parents who lived in urban areas were reporting it was more difficult than parents who lived in rural areas to find childcare. And then, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about what parents said about their previous childcare arrangements and what changes they'd seen amidst the coronavirus. So parents said, most parents said that their provider right now is completely closed. 61% said their provider is not caring for children right now. You'll see that some programs are open with limited hours or just to care for essential workers. And then the statistic that 21% of parents said their provider remained open. That was kind of what I alluded to earlier. And of this, we kind of broke it down by different provider types. Certain providers are more likely to remain open right now, particularly family childcare homes are the most likely to remain open and caring for children when compared particularly to those larger centers where you're seeing just 10% of parents reporting that those larger centers are remaining open. And so we also asked parents whose programs had closed if they were still paying tuition. Most are not, but about 2 in 5 are at least paying something to their providers. And some parents are even saying that they are required to keep paying in order to keep their slot. This really is showing the struggle that providers have in needing an income in order to pay rent, their utilities, and hopefully keep some of their staff on, not having a rainy day fund to tap into, and how some of that is getting passed on to parents. So hopefully we can kind of talk about this later on in the discussion. And then with all of these changes, we wanted to know how parents are managing their caregiving responsibilities and kind of juggling the change in their work. So we asked parents the different things that they've been doing in order to balance their caregiving responsibilities with their work responsibilities. And you'll see here the different changes that parents are making. They were able, again, to choose all that applied to them. So parents are likely doing more than one activity, but you'll see here that mostly what they're doing is alternating work schedules, relying on family members or friends. Some of them are working less hours. Some are even taking paid or unpaid leave in order to care for their children. We found that lower income parents are less likely than higher income parents to be alternating their work hours, working less, or working outside of their normal business hours. And we also found that lower income parents are more likely to be taking unpaid leave to care for their children. Another thing we found was that single households were twice as likely than 2 adult households to be taking unpaid leave. We also wanted, again, to look at the differences in essential workers and the challenges that they're facing, and particularly they are facing much more difficult and notable struggles. Not surprisingly, they have less flexibility with their work schedules. So what we found was that they cannot alternate with a family member or work outside of their normal business hours in order to care for their children. Now I'm going to turn it over to Linda to discuss how parents view the childcare market and about the future implications.
Linda, you're still muted. 1 second. Can you unmute yourself? Can you, on the bottom right of your picture? There you go.
Okay, we're all still getting used to technology, and so you have to bear with us on some of this. But thank you to Kathleen and Arabella for setting the stage on a lot of this. And what I want to get to now are the implications of all of this for the childcare industry. One of the things that we have been struggling with, next slide please, is sort of the essential nature of childcare. Does the community or does the public at large think that childcare is an essential service? And more specifically, do parents feel that way? And I think this was somewhat of a surprise to us, because these were parents with children under age 5 who use some kind of childcare. And you see the statistics up there in terms of whether or not they saw childcare as an essential service. And I think that this is a question that I'm going to pose to the field at the end of this, is how and what do we do to make sure that people understand the significance of childcare as an essential service? I think the other interesting statistic on this one was that more men than women, feel like it is, and I thought that was interesting as well. And not surprisingly, that those who are currently working see it that way in a higher capacity. And I think to a certain extent that equates also to income levels of the people, if you go back to one of the earlier slides. So the next slide, please. In terms of the views on how this all rolled out with the state childcare plans, in other words, what did states do immediately when all of this started happening? And this was good news for, I think, most of our state childcare administrators in our state governments, that for the most part, and that's a very high percentage in a survey, 77% of the parents said they were aware of their state's plan for childcare operations, and that the vast majority, 82%, were supportive of that. That did vary a little bit by income level, with higher income families, parents more aware of what the state plans were and more likely to agree with them. But again, good news that at least that information was getting out to parents. So looking ahead about how we reopen childcare, I think that we had some lessons in all of this. Arabella alluded to these when she was talking a little bit earlier, but I think these are very, very important statistics about what parents' concerns are about returning their children to childcare. And as Arabella said, I mean, we have found through repeated work that we've done with parents that overwhelmingly parents are concerned about trust. And now the trust equates to their concerns about the health and safety of their children. So if you look at that percentage, 75% are concerned about returning their children to childcare because they fear they might be exposed to the COVID virus. So I think we're going to have some work to do, and I've got some questions I want to ask the audience at the end of this. I think that the whole early childhood community needs to think about. And then obviously the next two, affording childcare when this is all over, and will their providers be there, as we've talked about. So we've got some serious things to be thinking about as we move beyond the next several months. Next slide. So their concerns, they did vary by region of the country, and I think this is interesting and somewhat not so surprising in that urban parents were the most concerned about the issues of availability and affordability, and not so much in the rural areas. And I think that that statistic speaks for itself. But when it comes to urban parents, with the percentage over half of them being concerned about this, it's something to pay attention to. When thinking about this, parents are worried about their finances, and that takes no explanation. So that their current finances, combined with their ability to find and keep a job after all this is over, is high on their list. So also finding childcare that fits their needs in particular and obviously supports their children's development. So I think, again, some things that we can do as we move forward to helping parents find and keep childcare in the years or months and years ahead is going to be an important thing, and especially for those lower income families who really are concerned about the affordability when this is all over. Next slide. So as Arabella said, last time we actually asked them an open-ended question, and that's where we learned so much about how important trust is to parents. If you get a chance after this is over to take a look at this, I highly encourage parents to take a look at how parents responded to this question. What do they want providers to do that could help them with their concerns about putting their children back into childcare? I think there are some interesting comments about the group sizes and limiting the sizes of children. I think for some of our bigger providers that has some big implications. Limiting class sizes, things like doing daily temperature checks. But I think down in the lower left hand on the communication issue, this is again another place where I think the childcare community needs to be thinking forward. What is it going to take to help parents feel comfortable? And I think they say in here, let me know what safety precautions are being taken, how are centers being cleaned, sort of how could we assure them on some of these? So cleaning and the trust issues, again, are very important. Some parents just flat said that they were not going to be willing to send their children back to care until this pandemic is through. Unclear as to what that might mean, but something that we really need to think about. When exactly are we going to consider this is over? And I don't think it's going to be as instantly as we all go back to work. I think that until, there are some other things sorted out, we're going to have to deal with that issue. So I want to move forward and talk a little bit about the financing and support for childcare. We were curious as to, next slide please, as to what parents thought the role was, who was responsible for financially supporting the childcare during these times. And as you can see by the slide, that it was the federal government is overwhelmingly where they think the responsibility is, lesser extent states, and then parents completely and local governments. So there is some differences in this between the two parties. They're split on whether they think federal and state is the most responsible. and also it's sometimes the issues of parents, whether or not they think how they think parents are responsible for this. So let's go to the next slide, please. In terms of their support for the essential workers thing, again, who's responsible for paying for childcare for essential workers? We were curious about that because keeping these centers and these programs, family childcare homes, open places a certain amount of risk on essential workers, and who is responsible for paying for that? And you see the results there. I think that it's not so obvious, the split between Democrats and Republicans, where the Democrats tend to think that the federal government is most responsible and Republicans tend to believe that parents are. I think there's some implications for this as we move forward with some of the supplements we put out there for essential workers in terms of childcare. Something that we want to hear more from the field about how we're doing that and how we're raising the pay of essential workers to compensate them for the risks and the exposure that they are taking for being where they are. So now I want to move on to put a few things on the table, and we hope that we get some serious questions about some of these. What are the implications of this for childcare moving forward? I think first and foremost, we need to think about how we work on defining this field as essential. I think one of the standouts to me in all of this is that we have not clearly convinced the public that childcare is mission essential. And what do we need to do about that to make that more apparent to people? And I will, go back to my days with military childcare, where military childcare was always seen as mission essential. If the base went on alert, the childcare centers were open. That was all there was to it. We have not made that link clearly yet in the rest of this country, and we need to do that because it will help us in terms of figuring out how we support this moving forward with funding. We have to figure out more about what's going on with parents in this country, because I think one of the questions I have is, if parents aren't comfortable with childcare, we won't need providers. So we have got to figure out how we manage our message going forward. What are we doing to make sure that childcare is safe and healthy and that parents can trust putting their children in care again? And that has a lot to do with not so much focus on what is happening now, but what are we doing to prepare for people going back to work and their comfort. So the trust issue is big, and we're going to have to be able to respond to what parents are looking for in childcare. What is going to be the immediate versus the long-term impact on return to childcare? As you saw, parents are splitting responsibilities now. How fast do we transition back to the way we used to be working is going to be a question for a lot of people, and especially for childcare providers, because it has impact on their financial situation down the road. I think there's been a number of times we think about when this is all over that the incomes will just go back to normal, but I'm not sure that they will. And how are we preparing for that as a field? Another question that I think is important to look at in this is, if we go into a period of really high unemployment, what will that do to the demand for childcare in this country? And I think there are serious implications for that we need to begin to factor in. I think the fact that parents want smaller group sizes, smaller ratios, etc., in the immediate aftermath of this, just because of the perceived spread of the virus, is something that's going to have to be thought through in terms of our financial models for childcare, because reducing ratios, as many in this field knows, is always a challenge for us. And now parents are saying that they want smaller group sizes and they want restrictions on numbers of children in rooms. So my question to the field really is, how do we begin to think forward and plan for re-entry of parents into the workforce, and how do we plan for childcare to be ready for that, and ready in a way that makes parents comfortable with what we are providing, and that they feel they have some assurance that their children are going to be, back to those old words, safe and healthy. So I think with that, we want to start taking questions if we have them, and see what your concerns are about this. And so, where do we see the questions?
So there are 11 published questions.
Okay.
To the right. I'm happy to ask them. Would you like me to ask them, Linda?
Yeah, because I'm not seeing them on my screen.
Yeah. So Janet asked, you said a national survey. By that, do you mean nationally representative? Yes,
it was nationally representative. I think the error rate on it was 3%, if I'm not mistaken. Kathleen, you might be able to answer that better, but yes, it was nationally representative.
Yes, and we've got several questions. Can you all hear me? We got several questions about the respondent profile. So in the chat, I placed a longer breakdown of the respondent profile on a PowerPoint that we posted on our website. So you can kind of read through it. It breaks down age, community type, gender, income levels, education, region, kind of everything you could think of. So if you have further questions, feel free to let us know, but we've posted a lot of that data online for you.
Awesome. And then Albert asked, the graph about whether parents think of childcare as essential is about whether they believe so during a pandemic, right?
Kathy, do you remember the exact wording on that question?
Yeah, so it was specific to the current crisis and whether or not childcare should remain open amidst the coronavirus.
Great. And then Anonymous asked, the strikingly low percentage who are still using their former child care providers is very concerning regarding the impact on the social, emotional, attachment health of young children. Very disruptive and likely to be a major factor in what happens next as parents get back to out-of-home work and have to once more transition their children to new providers. Providers will need a lot of support as well to manage this. So it's not so much a question, just a comment.
I would like to comment on that because I do think that one of the things that I didn't say when I said the implications for childcare moving forward is how are we going to work with the childcare teachers to understand sort of what's going on. I think we haven't given a lot of thought to that, but I think you're right, whoever that commenter was, because I do think it's going to be a transition for children again. We were concerned when we asked the question about we thought the teachers would be more of a something that parents would be concerned about. We were a little surprised to see how high the health and safety was. I guess, I don't know why I say that, but that we were. And we thought that transitioning and loss of teachers might be something that parents were more concerned about. But that said, we are going to have to do something as an industry to help childcare providers prepare for this, because in any childcare program, as many of you know, you don't get a whole group of children all at once that are all new. And so transitioning, a group like that into care might be different. And there could be other social emotional things going on as they've gone from 100% parent time to going back into, in a setting that they may not remember or be as familiar to them. So that's a really good point, and I think it's one that we need to put on our radar screen to talk about.
Awesome. So the next question is from Shannon, and she said, do we know what the definition of essential was or how it was interpreted? For example, I think most people think schools are essential, but not essential enough to have people risking their health, whereas there's an equity issue if we think child care providers with poverty wages and often lacking health insurance are essential. If they were essential, we'd be paying them and providing insurance.
Calvin, do you remember the exact wording on that? We can look that up for people.
Yeah, so when during this webinar, when we kind of classify essential workers, we classified those as those that are working in grocery stores, in the defense industry, healthcare, public administration, public health and safety, pharmacy, and transportation industries. So those were kind of the ones that we picked out of all of the other industries that we surveyed.
Does that answer the question?
I think so.
I do think that there's something in this, you know, when we talk about this, and that's one of the reasons that when I said we have got to come to some kind of grips with paying the people who do this work, and especially when they are doing it as essential workers. And I know I've had a number of conversations with people around the country about this issue and the fact that there's, to a certain extent, some controversy over the unemployment insurance that's out there right now, and that is giving people an incentive not to work. And my response to that has been pretty simple. Then we need to pay these people adequately for the risk they are taking in doing this work right now, because it is not without risk that they are caring for people who are exposed to the virus. They themselves are at risk and their families are at risk. And if we are going to make sure that we have good people working, we're going to have to deal with that. And I think there was money in the $3.5 billion that went out to do that, to help support essential workers during this crisis. And so, to your point, I think it's not the long-term solution to the pay problem in childcare, but I don't think we should be asking people to do this work for minimum wage, as you say, right now. Because it is more risky. What's the next question, Chloe?
Well, the next question is from Nicole from Washington State, and it says, how do we direct testing/screening kits for COVID to childcare programs to ensure teachers and kids returning to childcare are not sick?
Wow, that's a good question, and that's one that we really have not talked about, but I think that's an important one. And it needs to be put on the list of things that we talk about in terms of policy moving forward with anything that comes out of Congress from now on. Because we have heard, Nicole, that there are childcare programs that are really struggling with getting supplies and equipment and cleaning supplies, gloves, things like that. And we know that that's already a problem. So we need to pay attention to this, because we can't assure parents that these programs are clean and healthy and safe if we can't get them the cleaning supplies. So I think there are challenges in that we're facing, but do I have an actually answer for that one? I don't, but it is something that we should put on people's radar screen as a way to help parents feel more comfortable with childcare. Thank you for that.
Awesome. So the next question is from Francis, and it says, I think it's still interesting that in the midst of COVID, that parents were still having problems finding care. Do you know what methods were being used to get this information out to parents? Were essential employees informed of the options available to them? What forms of communication, email, phone calls, letters, being used to inform them of their options? Sorry.
As best I know, Francis, the answer to that varies by state. There are states that have set up hotlines to help parents find care for essential workers. I know several states that have done that. There are various ways, but that is highly dependent on the state that you live in. But it is something that I think, and that may have changed since this survey too, because I think the states are getting more on top of some of this and figuring out what they need to get out to parents. So I think that it's getting better, but it's definitely something that is state dependent.
Great, and then we'll just do a few more. This one's from Chris. It says, being part of the child subsidy program, what suggestions do you have that we can implement to help in the recovery of childcare within our programs?
Well, I think that I'm struggling to understand that there would be a difference. I think that all programs need to do certain things during this recovery, and that so much of it gets back to issues of communication and how are we telling parents what we're doing. I frequently say to people who ask this question about childcare and the health and safety, I think childcare in most places is one of the healthier places because of the requirements on childcare people to have certain kinds of training, to have, health and safety training, to have CPR, to have some of these things, and the rigorous inspections that have been going on since the reauthorization of the Child Care and Development Block Grant in 2014. So I think we've done a lot to improve the health and safety and the circumstances for children. I don't think we've publicized that enough so that parents understand these things about childcare. I often think about hand washing and how childcare people just automatically know about hand washing. Now the country's learning about it, but this is something that childcare is known for a long time. So I think in terms of preparing for going back, it's as much important to communicate what we're already doing and then what we're doing on top of that will make a difference in how this happens. And I don't think that is different for subsidy kids or where it's private pay. I think it's children are children, and we need to assure parents of these things.
Great. And then this question's from Teresa. It says, how do we help the public understand that our biggest challenge with childcare is that because of how we finance it, it may not just be there anymore when the pandemic lifts? So sort of helping them understand how essential it is that the industry survives.
I think that's a very complicated question, and one that we all need to give a lot more thought to, because I don't think until the pandemic that most of the public understood the fragile nature of childcare businesses. I think a lot of people understood that our workforce was underpaid, that there were different things going on, but I don't think that people across the board understood exactly how razor thin these programs are in terms of their operating expenses. And I think it's shown a light on this for all of us. And I think as we move forward, what we're going to have to do is figure out what is it going to take to stabilize childcare as a business. And that needs to be more thoughtful than I think all of us are really now considering. And I say that because I think right now we drive most of the childcare funding through the demand side of the house. In other words, through parent fees and subsidy. We have not figured out how to stabilize the supply side. And I think that's the conversation we need to have as we move forward. What is it going to take to help childcare providers have a stable enough income that they can make it through more than 2 weeks without going out of business? And I think that's the question on the table as we move forward. And hopefully we have enough people in this country that we can think this through. So it's a challenge I would put out to the audience on this call. I think we all need to get on with it and figure that out.
Great. I'll do 3 more, I think. This one's from Anonymous. It asks, do you know anything about parents' childcare arrangements conditional on the uncertain duration of the pandemic? For example, are parents less likely to recruit a family member for childcare if they don't know how long they will need to rely on them?
You know, we didn't ask too many questions about that, but I think the questions that we have asked indicate that in some ways questions, I always say when you do a survey like this, you always figure out what you didn't ask. And I think these are some of the questions that we need to figure out going forward as we move into the next phase of what this country is going through. And I think that's a real question. I am very concerned that parents, given what we already know, are going to be reluctant to go right back into childcare, that this is going to be a longer phase in, which is going to be a challenge for our childcare industry as a whole. And that how long is that phase in going to be? We don't know. So how long is it going to take for parents to not rely on family and and move back into the formal system, that's a big question. Some of it's going to be depending on their finances, and we know that they're already concerned about that from the survey. Some of it's going to depend on, you know, what's available, and then some is going to depend on that big question out there about trusting the system and trusting the health and safety of their children to back to childcare providers. So that's an unknown. My instinct, based on what we're hearing so far, is that it's going to be a longer process than I think we're all expecting. But that's a question that remains out there and remains to be answered. I would say one other thing, and I think I alluded to it when I talked about what will happen to childcare when we have a really high unemployment rate, because childcare for the last several years, because of a very, you know, hot economy, has been really, you know, it's been very highly utilized. Let's put it that way. If we move into an economy where we have 15 to 20% unemployment, that is going to change. And I think what we are not factoring in is a couple of things. Will we see more home-based childcare? We have a couple of things coming out in the very near term on the whole issue of what's going on with family childcare. Is it time in this country to get our heads around how we support and organize family childcare to make sure that we have the same, you know, quality and cost that we have for everything else? So I think there are a number of questions on the table. That's a good one, and I think it's something that we're going to have to sort out as we move forward. So, how are we doing?
Great, so we'll do two more. So this is from Mushumi, and they asked, parents, as the data show, are concerned about COVID-related safety issues. Still, they need it, but most don't consider it to be an essential service. Were there differences by the care setting these parents use, and how are working from home parents dealing with this situation?
Catherine, can you take that one in terms of the care settings? Did we gather that by care setting? I don't know that we did we? That's one that we might want to get and get back to people on.
Sorry, muted. Yeah, we have all of our, so if you go to the web page, where our survey kind of lives, we have some really detailed information that you can read through about the types of providers that people were using. And so we can kind of get back to you on some of those details, but anyone's available to or able to read through some of those deeper details as well.
Mm-hmm.
Great, and then the last one is from Shannon Christian, and she said, are your viewers aware of the state level information for essentials workers seeking childcare listing that the Office of Child Care just posted, listing the state websites, R&Rs, and call lines offering to help essential workers to find childcare? And she posted the link in the Q&A chat, so if anyone wants to view that, it will be there. And we can also provide the link as well.
Okay. I'm not sure they are, Shannon, but I think you just made them aware. So we'll continue to get that message out there in the work that we do. Okay, is that about it, Chloe?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so, well, great conversation, everyone. We appreciate very much the questions, and as we move forward with some of these discussions about the implications of this long-term for childcare, we'll try to keep everyone posted of what we're up to. We do think that we need to pay more attention in this country to what parents are thinking and what they care about and how they are what their impressions are going to be going forward, because if we preserve the childcare industry and the parents don't want it, then we have a problem. So this is a two-sided equation. We care about the industry, the child care providers out there, the people working in this, but we have to pay attention to what parents want in this country if we're going to keep this industry stable. So with that in mind, I want to thank everyone on the call, and certainly the staff at BPC who worked very hard with a very short turnaround on this survey, and the people at Morning Consult who conducted the survey for us. As we said, that this information is on our website, and we hope you'll go take a look at the details of it. And then if you have questions, be sure to email them to us or contact us, because the more we think about what's on your minds, the more we are able to do our work here in Washington. So with that, I want to say thank you, and be safe, be healthy, and stay tuned. Thank you, everyone.